Hello, and welcome to The Insiders, a visit with the men and the women who shape public policy for our country. Today we're very fortunate to have with us Regent Dennis Ross, Tampa representative on the Board of Regents, and as will be our custom, we will have with us a member of the USF community. Today we have Edwin Narain, who's the president of our student body. And rather than sit around and talk myself, let's get right out to the questions, and let's visit with Dennis a little bit and learn how public policy is shaped in Florida in the Board of Regents with people like Mr. Ross. Regent Ross, a question that I'm curious about, and President Narain and I were talking about earlier, is when the governor approached you and asked you, would you be willing to serve on the Board of Regents, when he was thinking about appointing you, what made this appointment attractive to you? What did you see it as an opportunity to accomplish?
Well, I've always been a big fan of higher education. I come from a family of educators. My dad was a school principal here in Tampa.
A wonderful
overseas.
principal.
That's right. And then overseas for about 20 years. I was very fascinated by academics as a young person. In fact, I originally intended to try to be a college professor and wasn't quite bright enough for it. Fully recognized both from the perspective of the economic development for our society and in terms of the socialization of our society, that education at all levels and culminating in higher education is critically important. In its essence, I guess, I've always felt that education, particularly public education, was the foundation of our democratic society, and so the opportunity to serve on the governing board for the state universities was a unique opportunity that I was very anxious to have the chance to fulfill.
Has it met your expectations thus far in the 3.5 some odd years that you've been on the board?
Yes and no. The good news is the discovery at a level of detail which I did not have the opportunity, obviously, previously to appreciate, of the quality of the system we have. There's no doubt in my mind that our 10 universities are on a par with any other state system in terms of the level of institution which we provide. That was the good news. The bad news was I had no conception of just how poorly we were serving the total population of our state in terms of higher education. And what I mean by that is in the 10 universities we were able to provide a quality education for students who are on the top of the academic ladder, who have high SATs, high GPAs, and that's wonderful. And from that constituency come many of the leaders for the future. On the other hand, people like myself probably wouldn't have been able to get into school these days. And so the alternative available to that student is the 2+2 system. 2+2 system is a wonderful opportunity for education, no question, and it's been very successful for many people in our state. However, when you look at the numbers in Florida and nationwide, there's a startling statistic that I became aware of, which has been the primary motivator of my view of the future of this state and its higher education system, namely a student who is a first-time in college student in a 4-year institution versus a student who is a first-time in college student in a 2-year institution. The 2-year institution student has holding relatively constant for SAT and GPA. The student in the 2-year institution has somewhere between 15 to 20% chance, based on whose numbers you believe, of matriculating with a baccalaureate degree. Whereas a student who enters into a 4-year institution has somewhere between a 50 and a 70% chance of matriculating with a baccalaureate degree. The majority not the majority, almost every state in the nation has a 3-tier system. They have a 2-year college system, they have a primarily 4-year baccalaureate-based institution, and then they have graduate institutions. What we've done in this state is created a system that is almost exclusively, particularly in the large universities, a graduate institution-based system. The exception would be University of West Florida, University of North Florida, and now Florida Gulf Coast University, plus a 2-year system, which leaves a gap. What do you do about the, quote, average student who wants to matriculate in a 4-year environment and can't get in? And so as a result, this state is, these numbers vary year to year by a few points, but typically we run somewhere between 48th and 49th in the number of baccalaureate degrees produced per unit of population in the country. Now, to me, that is totally unacceptable.
It's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing.
Well, what role do you see the community colleges playing over the next 10 years with the increased enrollment that's projected for the state university system? You say there's a problem here with the matriculation from a 2-year to a 4-year to possible master's and graduate programs. How important do you see the community colleges?
I think a community college system such as we have is a treasure. There's no question that the notion that everyone ought to get a 4-year degree and go on to graduate school is absurd. There are many pursuits in our society, whether that's in medical technologies, whether that's in terms of computer applications, whether that's in terms of clerical work, secretarial work. There's a lot of jobs in this country where a 2-year environment is entirely appropriate. And I think our community college system does as fine a job as any in the country in producing graduates from that perspective. They also do, I should point out, an extraordinarily good job with students who are on the AA degree track. Those students who obtain an AA degree in this state and then go on to a 4-year institution have essentially the same profile in terms of graduation rates and in terms of GPA and everything else as the first time in the so-called native students in the 4-year institutions. That's not the issue. We know that works. The problem is there's something magic about being in a 2-year environment and then having to make the transition into a 4-year environment where large numbers of students simply drop out of the system. So once again, it's that gap. And I don't personally believe that the role of a 2-year institution should be confused with that of 4-year institutions. I don't think that it's appropriate to have a community college system providing 4-year degrees. That's the role of the state university system. Now, the question becomes, how do you do that? The cost there is tremendous. As you're aware, perhaps some of our viewers are not aware, we're looking at a population explosion in higher education in the state. We're looking at an increase from roughly 250,000 students in our state university system to somewhere between 350 and 450 in the next 10 years. Where are they going to go, which is the essence of your question. Right. The problem is also at the same time that we're having that reality, and that's a reality. I mean, those kids are in school now in K through 12, so we know they're going to be going into to the SUS, state university system. So the problem is, at a point in time when the source of funding for public school construction, both K through 12 and the university system, namely the so-called Public Education Capital Outlay Fund, PECO, when those funds are dropping off dramatically because of some problems with that tax source, where in the world are we going to get the money to build the facilities to deal with these new students? The answer, in my judgment, is severalfold. First of all, some way, somehow, there's ultimately got to be tax reform in this state, but I'm going to leave that alone for the first
Right.
Number two, the issue of distance learning. There's no question that by providing Saturday classes, perhaps even Sunday classes, by providing more nighttime classes, by providing computer-based education, by providing TV-based education, that we can more efficiently and effectively use our existing facilities. As to what proportion of the total increase that those new technologies can absorb, that's what's under very serious consideration now by the Board of Regents and others in a process of strategic planning which we're immersed in right now, which has to be finished next year. The thrust of which will be to deal with this exact question: how in the world are we going to meet this influx of new students? There are several other ideas that have been put on the table that I think are very interesting. One is to transition some of the community colleges into 4-year institutions, where they cease to be community colleges and become 4-year institutions. That's a possibility. And how exactly that would happen, which institutions that would be, those again are being reviewed by both the Board of Regents and the Public Education Planning Commission, so-called PEPC. The second option, and the one that I think holds the greatest promise, frankly, is to build on our existing 10 state universities to produce branch campuses, but not branch campuses as we currently contemplate them, such as St. Pete or Polk County for USF, but campuses who have a more particularly defined mission in statute, namely that they will be 4-year institutions, they will not provide PhDs, they will have a minimum of, pick your number, 3,000, 5,000, 6,000 students, they will not have more than 10 or 12,000 students. That builds upon the existing administrative infrastructure within the existing institutions, but also provides an opportunity to provide an environment that can be more focused on the 4-year experience as opposed to the complete graduate experience which the major universities provide.
We have a wonderful program here on campus, the Learning Communities, wherein you have a cohort of students who take all of their courses together and move forward as a team, starting as FTICs, first time in college, as freshmen. Are you saying then that you would pretty much enlarge that concept and have learning communities on our branch campuses so that you could go in as a freshman in your branch campus, where right now we only offer upper division courses, but go in as a freshman and graduate
Absolutely.
there, and some of the higher volume courses. Edwin?
Oh, I was just going to ask, how important is the new chancellor and the selection of the new chancellor, Mr. Adam Herbert, out of the University of North Florida, going to be to the state university system master plan over the next 10 years? Obviously, we're discussing the overall population boom over the next 10 years and some of the solutions. How is the chancellor going to play a role in all of this?
Good question.
Well, first of all, let me state the great personal pleasure I take in seeing Adam Herbert become chancellor. We're going to miss Charlie Reed. He was an extraordinary person, clearly one of the finest chancellors in the history of the United States, but he's moved on, and we hope that he'll do a great job for California. But Adam Herbert is a fantastic person. He is the American dream, in my opinion. The guy's got it all. He's extremely intelligent. He's a proven academician. He has a wonderful charisma about him. I think he's a tremendously courageous person. As you may or may not be aware, he came from a single parent home in Muskogee, Oklahoma, and went on to the University of Southern California on a scholarship. Ended up getting his PhD from the University of Pittsburgh, and has served literally at every level. He's been everything from an instructor to a university president and all the stops along the way. So the man understands higher education to its core. That's the first point. Second point, by virtue of having been at FIU in Miami and on the branch campus at FIU in the northern part of Dade County, and now having been president of a regional university in the University of North Florida, he brings a perspective from both the AAU type institution in Pittsburgh and USC, as well as a branch campus, as well as a regional institution. So if you had to create someone for the role of chancellor to fill the big shoes of Charlie Reed, I can't conceive of anyone who'd be better than Adam Herbert. On top of which, he just happens to be a very good guy.
Mm-hmm. What do you think the biggest challenge is now that he's sort of the quarterback for the Regents team? Now that we have football here at USF, we use those analogies.
Go Bulls!
Right.
Now that he's there, and what do you see as the relationship between the chancellor? How is that going to develop? And the regents, and you have some very independent-minded and very talented presidents in our 10 universities. And then we have another critter out there, the state legislature, which will be making some decisions and be involved in the process. Where do you see the dynamic going in the future for our state university system?
Well,
all those players.
I'll illustrate my point by
Mr. Sybil Leak.
by having said to Dr. Herbert, why in the world would you want this job? Trying to deal with those many constituencies. To say that the regents have big egos, that the university presidents have big egos,
Well, I
and
never said that. I
know you didn't, but I am. And that the legislature has big egos would be a gross understatement. Again, I didn't mention this specifically in my profile of Adam Herbert. One of the things that impresses me the most, perhaps the most impressive thing about him, is his extraordinary skills at building consensus. He knows how to look beyond egos, focus on the issue, bring people to the table, go through the process, however painful it may be, of building a consensus, so that when time comes for action, you've co-opted everybody, whether it's the university presidents, the legislature, the regents, into a decision. After all, the man's academic area is public administration, and his particular interest and forte is in the area of building public policy. So we have, I'm not sure he's the first one in the United States, but certainly I'm sure among a limited number of people to move into a chancellor's position who actually was trained for the job. That's what he's done all of his life, is prepare for being in the role that he's in. So I think Adam Herbert is going to be a real special resource for the future of the state. Go back to the point I raised about him. I think the guy's got a lot of guts. And I think that's critically important, because in what I've had to say about the role of community colleges, the role of the SUS, and the need for identification of a new tier of educational opportunity, namely baccalaureate-focused four-year institutions. That's going to be terribly politically controversial. But I believe that, as always, economics will be the primary driver. Let me illustrate my point. If you review the cost to produce a baccalaureate degree in this country, there's a very, very interesting curve that the Board of Regents is using in its strategic planning process right now. Namely, if you start over here on the left-hand side with 0 students, you go over here to 50,000 students, you look at the cost of education. For the first roughly 2,000 to 3,000 students, the cost is very high. Then when you get past about 3,000, 3,500 students, the cost drops almost to half. But then something interesting happens. As you build back towards 10,000 students, it accelerates back up, and once you reach 15 to 20,000 students, it becomes even higher than the small institutions. What happens is, invariably, and this is the case with every one of our universities to date, with the exception perhaps of the University of West Florida, is once you start on the path to 15,000 or 20,000 students, it becomes almost unavoidable. In fact, in the history of this country, it is unavoidable that that institution will become a research-focused institution. When it does, the average cost to produce a baccalaureate degree goes back to a very high level, $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 per student, as opposed to $3,000 or $4,000 per student in that $3,000 to $10,000 range. So the economics of the case say we can't continue to build universities of Florida, universities of South Florida, FSUs. There's only so many of those institutions that our state can afford. On the other hand, we're already undereducating our population in terms of our production of baccalaureate degrees, and we're facing a 50% increase in our student body. So how in the world are we going to do it? To me, the answer is very simple. We must provide institutions in that 3,000 to 10,000 range, because that's where we know you can produce baccalaureate degrees, number one, most successfully, back to my 50 to 70% graduation rate versus 15 to 20% in the community college first time pursuing a baccalaureate degree is the ultimate goal. So that, in the final analysis, that has to be the answer, in my personal opinion. The Regents have not adopted that as policy yet, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see us do that. And grappling with that question of structure and finding the best way through the use of existing resources in the SUS, existing resources in the community colleges, and construction of new facilities to meet that need, which is the crying need we have for the next 15 years in the state, is going to be a tough task, especially with limited financial resources. Back to my point, you got to have a consensus builder. And I think Adam Herbert is unique in that respect. I look forward to him providing the leadership. Let's face it, boards of regents or legislatures or any other collection of folks can only do so much. You got to have a leader. That's why Charlie Reid, I think, was so successful. He was a leader, and I'm fully confident that Adam Herbert is a leader of similar stature, who, building on his consensus skills, will be able to deal with this problem.
President Rain, you think he likes him? just a little, just a little. It sounds like you have a tremendous amount of respect for our new chancellor. Earlier, Edwin was talking about the very issue of the expansion and of quality of the degree, and what today's students are confronting that some of the other students that preceded them, people like you and me, did not have to confront. You want to mention some of the time and degree issues?
That was another historical epic.
Yeah.
Well, in reference, we were actually discussing the law that's pending in the legislature that could possibly limit the amount of credit hours that a student could take without being subject to the 15% penalty after reaching 138 credit hours. Personally, I don't agree with the rule. I think it's unfair to actually, it's almost like a tax on this generation. One of the focuses over
we don't want you to learn too much.
Yeah, basically, one of the focuses over the last couple of years with education is not just people getting degrees, but actually educating the entire population. Here at the University of South Florida, we have a number of non-traditional students who basically are not actually pursuing degree, non-degree seeking students is what we call them, but they actually just come here to take a couple of classes. And then you have people in the corporate sector who have already gotten their degrees and reached their 120 hours and then decide to come back to school, maybe because they have to, try to get a job advancement or something like that, and they require them to take extra courses. But once you reach 138 hours, if this rule is to pass, then you're going to be subject to a 15% fee. I don't necessarily think that's a fair rule. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I was not an advocate for that approach, but it's reality. So my solution for that focus which of course was driven by precisely the discussion we were having a few moments ago, and that is there's X amount of resources, there's Y amount of demand, and they don't mesh. And so how are you going to deal with educating the largest number of people you can and maintain quality with limited resources? To me, the solution is more resources. That's not forthcoming. And so we have an obligation as the governing board for this state system to ensure there is maximum access. Having said that, the thing that I've argued strongly for, both in the legislative environment and within the regions itself, is for maximum flexibility. And that is that the university presidents would be responsible for the ultimate outcome. If you took 10,000 students and divided it by 10,000 students, you got to come out with 138. As to this student, if they were 150, and in the judgment of the president, they shouldn't be charged excess tuition, that ought to be the president's decision, as long as the president adheres to the overall 138. My personal view is that the 138 is more than adequate to subsume within that number all kinds of students and all kinds of experiences. Because let's face it, there are some kids who can't wait to get 120 hours and get out. And there are other kids who want to take 160 hours. It ought to be up to the individual university to make the judgment about how to administer that program in a way that doesn't distort the educational experience, which is going to vary from student to student, but meets the policy goal of trying to get students out in a reasonable time frame. And I think the 138 hours is sufficient. Let me back off. The data so far indicates 138 hours is likely to be adequate to meet that goal if we permit the presidents to deal with individual cases. When we get 2 or 3 years down the road, if in fact the university has worked hard at the principle and their average is 140, I can't get terribly excited about that. If their average is 160, which it's not going to be, then we'd obviously have a concern.
You say the president then, the president should be empowered to make this decision. What other powers do you think the presidents ought to have? What should be the president's
Kathy,
job in relation to you?
that's my primary concern with both the legislature and, frankly, the Board of Regents, and, frankly, the chancellor. And that is, I'm a proponent for a philosophy, which is that people at a policymaking level ought to set very broad policy outcomes, very broad bottom lines. You know, X